Yeah, here we go.
There he
Hey
is,
guys.
Pierre von Whittard. Welcome everyone to the Blim Masterclass with my very good friend Pierre von Whittard, otherwise known as Pete Whittard. Uh, for those of you who don't know, Pete has been a long time collaborator of mine. He was my teacher on I think my first day at the Guitar Institute in London when I came from Tassie to study there. He was a teacher on my first day and we became pals, and then we played in the Counterfeit Stones together and worked loads of different things. He often joins me for the workshops and stuff. He's a superb teacher, great guitar player and a great friend. So thank you for coming along, Pierre. It's
Thanks
great
for the
to see
kind
you again.
words.
And the thing that Pete has done lots of times that I've seen him teach and explain, and one of the classes that he taught me at the Guitar Institute was this accelerated learning, which was about the learning process and how to maximize your potential and all of that sort of stuff. So that's going to be the topic for today is making sure that you guys make the most of your practice time and think about practicing the right things the right way at the right time, and don't confuse motivations and the way that you practice certain things, because sometimes you can there's a risk of wasting your time if you practice the wrong thing with the wrong goal. But I'll save Pete to dig into all of that a little bit later. If it's okay with you, Pete, I'm thinking that we'll do our little chat or do the accelerated learning chat, and then toward the end we'll go in and do some of the Q&A from the submitted questions and from the class. So yeah, welcome everyone. I won't do the where are we all from thing today, but I've already seen that you guys have been up to that in the chat anyway. So welcome, Pierre. Where do you want to start with accelerated learnings?
Well, I put together a little slide deck. It's not a big slide deck, it's a little slide deck. As much as an interact as an aid memoir for myself. But I think Fanny's got that, so she's going to plug that up on the screen somewhere.
There we go.
And just to explain a bit more about what Justin was saying there, I used to give this lecture as a sort of kind of an hour introduction to every student who came to the Guitar Institute, as it was then, because it was a really sort of important thing. Everyone was sort of stepping into, when you go to a guitar school, you're stepping into a really intense, high pressure situation, and you've got to learn loads of stuff. That's a cool look. I like that. And the tendency is to over practice or to not practice the right thing. So this was really trying to get everyone on the right foot. And I learned about this from a place in America called GIT, which then became the Musicians Institute. And that's where some of this came from. Howard Roberts back in the day, who you may or may not know of as a guitar player. And he was combining sort of modern thinking about cognitive skills along with instrumental study, and they were trying to sort of reinvent how you learn an instrument. So this comes out of that. And there's loads of stuff on the internet if you want to go and have a dig around about how to do this. So we jump to my next slide. The whole premise of this is really about trying to sort of step back from guitar playing and figure out that guitar playing actually has two quite distinct components in it that you need to master. And those are motor skills and mental skills. And motor skills are the physical playing of the instrument. So, learning to play your pentatonic scale faster, learning to hold the plectrum and strum quicker, learning to get your left hand to do more legato, whatever it is. The physical attributes of playing the instrument are your motor skills. And motor skills are typically best understood sort of in parallel with thinking about going to the gym. So if you go to the gym, you've got to do a lot of repetitive exercise to build up your muscles. You don't go to the gym and do one set of reps and come out looking like Arnie. It takes a bit more work than that. There's no shortcuts. You've just got to go in and build up the muscle capacity. And your motor skills are very much like that on guitar. It's repetitious practice going over and over and over again over the same thing, basically. That's your motor skills. And your memory skills are conversely what you know, your knowledge, if you like, or the acquisition of new knowledge. Everyone cool? You can see it? Okay. So it's essentially learning new information. That's how we think of memory skills. And sort of counterintuitively, it's much harder to do that, much more tiring to do that than it is to do physical practice. And most people know how to practice motor skills, but most people don't know how to practice memory skills. And that's the one we're probably going to focus on the most. There are shortcuts. We can make this work much better for you. So this is really going to be talking about how those two things intersect. And as a guitar player, by the way, you can be imbalanced between these two things, because you can be a guitar player who knows loads of stuff but physically can't play the instrument, and we've all met loads of those guys. Or you can be a guitar player who just plays amazingly well but has no knowledge, if you like, no understanding what they're doing. And that also, we've met loads of those guys. So we kind of want to be in balance, generally speaking, as a guitar player across both of these areas of our study. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flip to the next screen, Fanny. That's fine for me, by the way, in terms. Okay. So from this point forwards, what we're going to do is we're going to treat your practice as one thing or the other. Now, the thing here that's important is this practice. You don't play and perform in this kind of mindset. You just play. You're supposed to bypass all of that stuff and just be in the moment playing music. But your practice can be far more effectively managed if you divide it into these two areas. So spin on to the next slide again, if we could. Thank you very much. So the first thing to think about is your attention span. So ignore the red for the time being, the red zigzag. That should have come in later, but there we go. So your attention span, how long do you think you can concentrate? Now, you can see from here, I've taken this from a couple of sources. This is nowhere near a scientific study, but it's very indicative of how much attention we can have. Apparently, I read somewhere the other day that we now have a shorter attention span than a goldfish, but either way, it's pretty short. So if you look here, typically within about a minute and a half, 2 minutes, you're down to just above 50% of your sort of focus. And that kind of chimes with us as humans. If you think of us as animals, we would have to be kind of, if we just sat there on the middle of go back to 100,000 years, if we just sat on the middle of a plain somewhere, staring at a flower going, man, that's really beautiful, for like the next 2 hours, a woolly mammoth is going to trot along, or something's going to trot along and eat us. So our survival instinct is to move our attention quickly to something else. So we find it very hard to focus on something exclusively for a long period of time. So what happens is when we're trying to learn something new, there's very little point trying to learn it after the first 90 seconds, 2 minutes. Once you've gone beyond that, you haven't got enough attention left in the tank to fully understand or fully to take in enough of that information. So what you have to do is you have to do this thing, which is essentially work in very small timeframes, which I'll come to in a second. If you're trying to learn something new and focus on new information, you're much better off doing it in a 1 minute burst, having a break. And then what happens is that break will reset you back to the 100%, which is the little red zigzag. By stopping every minute or 2 minutes, you will reset your attention span. So rather than spending the first 6 minutes in this example here, down at 25%, you can spend 6 minutes right up at the 100% by just consciously having breaks. And the really good news about the breaks you have to take is they need to be very, very short. They don't need to be long. So for example, if you just are focusing for 90 seconds on something with absolute focus and attention, take a break after that 90 seconds, literally get up off your chair, go and look at something else for 20 seconds, look out the window, go to the fridge, whatever. 20 seconds, go back and do the next thing, and you'll find that your attention span has been reset. So it's a very important thing to understand about attention span, about how we manage it. But the converse of that is going to motor skills. Remember, we said about motor skills are repetitive practice where you play the same thing over and over again. Do you think you need to be 100% focused for that to work? No, you don't. You need to be focused enough that as you're doing the exercise or playing the repetitive exercise you're doing, you need to be focused enough that you do it correctly and focused enough that you're aware of the things you have to do, but you don't need to be 100% completely in that place, which means when it comes to motor skills, your attention span can drift much lower because you'll still be doing it correctly when you're only paying 50% attention. So straight away, you can see that your attention span will work differently for you in a motor skill context versus a memory skill context. And that's a really useful thing to comprehend at this point. If we flip to the next screen, that will kind of explain it a bit more again. So that's putting into words what I've just said. If you're dealing with motor skills, you can work in longer chunks. You can say, you can practice the first position of the minor pentatonic, it will kill you, but play the whole thing up and down continuously against the metronome for 10 minutes. It's boring and it's repetitious, but as long as you're doing it correctly, you will gain the benefit from doing that. So as long as you're doing that, that's fine. And that also means because you're not concentrating at a really high level, it's not so physically draining. It is draining on your hands. Of course, you don't want to overdo it and hurt yourself, but it's not mentally tiring. You can just, which is why you can sit in front of the telly going, doing your kind of tremolo picking exercise, and you can just watch the news or whatever you're watching and you can do it. It's fine. On the other hand, those mental skills where you're at that 100% focus at the beginning, you can only work in 30 to 90 second chunks with lots of breaks because it's intensely focused. You're putting your brain into record. You're kind of focusing all of your mental attention on this one thing you've got to memorize, and you're going to do it as hard as you can for 90 seconds. That is really tiring, much more tiring than motor skills. So straight away, when we talk about working in chunks, we're going to work in a different chunk length for motor skills versus mental skills. So cool. Okay. Do you want to go on to the next slide? So we now talk about quantity of material and how much time, how much raw information you're going to transfer. Go ahead. Sorry, mate. I'm going to rabbit on.
I've got a question, Teach. Sorry. So I've encountered this before from you and from other people, the breaking up of attention, and I 100% agree with, I agree with the whole principle. It's a fact. But the practical part of just doing like motor skills, say a finger exercise or string bending or scales or whatever, it doesn't require the memory part. But when you're doing something like memorization, have you thought about different ways to use the breaks in a guitar way before? So I'm just thinking that when I was getting really into jazz and I was doing heavy analysis and trying to understand stuff like that, I would spend normally a couple of minutes, to be honest, not super short or long, but really concentrate on that. And then I would use my break to try playing it or try playing it in different parts of the neck or something like that. Have you thought about ways of doing that rather than necessarily standing up and wandering around? Or do you think that the benefit only comes from removing yourself completely from the context?
I think it works. Both work. Depends on you, doesn't it? Really. I think the thing about, I used to memorize things with breaks because I would be trying to memorize a bigger piece. So I would do, like, for example, if I was going to memorize a guitar solo, I'd memorize the first half of the bar in my memorization, have a break. Memorize the second half of the bar, have a break, and sort of work my way through it, and then try and perform the whole thing sequentially. So I tended to do memorization in a block and then motor skills in a block, but you could intersect them. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And to be honest with you, anything that just kind of refreshes your, I think anything that refreshes your view will refresh your ability to then go back and be more focused again. I mean, the classic one is you're looking at green plants. I've got a green plant over there in the corner, which is looking at a green plant is really good for your eyes to rest them from when you're working on screens. And I think the same thing applies to your brain. You just need to focus on something that's away from where you are, change the scene for just 10 seconds, and then come back in, and then you'll be more ready to take the next thing on. So yeah, that's a definitive non-answer there, which is you can do it either way.
You've got a future in politics, my friend.
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, no, but seriously, I think an awful lot of this comes down to taking these ideas and working out how it works for you, because we all have a different physiology. Like, for example, I used to be really good practicing in the morning. So if I don't, and I still am, if I don't play the guitar in the morning, I don't do anything of any use in the afternoon. So I need to make sure my day is organized. I play the guitar first thing, and I get up, walk the dog. If I don't play the guitar, then I don't get as much done. So I know that that's my body rhythm. I'm more awake, I'm more aware, I'm just more kind of up for it, if you like. I used to be different. I used to practice at night all the time because I was more of a night owl. But You just got, this is about getting to know what works for you and using these ideas to explore and monitor what happens. So when if you stumble on something that makes it really effective for you, that's the thing you've got to do. So
no, absolutely. Sorry to interrupt.
that's all right, man.
Like,
So
this is it's a really interesting. I find attention and being able to stay focused on stuff a really interesting realm, and it's something I explore with myself fairly often. But let's have a conversation. Go there another time, because I think retention is also the spacing effect and the revisiting of things or whatever it comes into play.
Yes, that's really important. Yeah, that comes.
That's
and
I
how
think
you
I
do
cover
that
that in the course later on, but
we're going to touch on these things. But no, I mean, jump in, otherwise I'll just keep banging on and we'll be off in the distance.
You're good. That's what you're here for, bro. All good. Okay, I'm going to disappear myself.
Great. So what's my next? Okay. So so that was going back to what's Justin saying there. So the thing to take away from this section here is that you need to do. Oh, I hadn't talked about this. Okay, so when you're learning motor skills, you can basically practice as much as you've memorized. So let's say you're learning the guitar solo from, I don't know, whatever, a Robin Fortune, one of my heroes. Once you've memorized it and you've learned a big section of it, you can practice that section as much as you want. As that's your motor skill practice, if you like. A couple of provisos, which I'll come back to later, but I'll say them now here. It must be from memory. Don't, whatever you do, memorize stuff and then have to have the piece of paper in front of you to play it. Because then the paper will be part of your memory requirement for that piece. By which I mean you won't be able to play it without a bit of paper in front of you, which is really, really annoying, because even though you might know it, what will happen is you'll take the paper away and you'll have a crisis of confidence that you don't. And even if you do, you'll still go wrong because that crutch is still there. So the idea of memorizing stuff is to get it off the page as soon as possible. And then when you practice it as a motor skill, you do it from memory, not from what you're looking at. So whatever you can manage to play. And the other thing as well is I'll come back to this later as well, is when you're practicing your motor skills, you must do it with no mistakes. And I will come back to that comment earlier. But broadly speaking, when you talk about quantity of material, with motor skills, we can work on larger chunks for longer time. So if you wanted to play that wonderful Robin Ford solo for 10 minutes, back to back with a metronome to practice it through, nothing's going to go wrong with that. You're just going to keep playing it. On the converse, memory skills are the opposite, because you cannot force large amounts of information into your brain quickly. It's just impossible to do large chunks quickly. The way to get large amounts of information into your head quickly is to do tiny, tiny bits, but much more often. It's much more in sort of in sympathy with parasympathetic system. I don't know which one it is. It's much more in sympathy with your system as a human to consume small amounts of information. So when you're memorizing stuff, at the most one bar at a time, could be one note at a time, small bits. Don't learn any mistakes. Make sure you can memorize it without any issues or you're absolutely completely convinced and you know exactly what you've got to play. And then you go to motor skills. So tiny chunks in tiny time frames is the way there. So I'm going to get Justin. Anything you want to add about quantity? Anything you want to jump in on that before I go on to the next one? Or any questions, guys? No? Cool. We'll spin on then. Yep.
Oh, there we go.
He was going to ask a question.
Too many cooks in the kitchen.
Don't
I'm
worry.
hitting myself on and fans taking me off. It's all like, it's going crazy there. No, I do think the repetition thing is super key to bringing it back. There's a theory mostly connected to the spacing effect is about the drawing out of the memory. So as well as the not programming the page as part of the memory process, when it comes time to recall something, I think that you've got to try as hard as you possibly can to recall it before you look at a cheat sheet, like a chart. And then if you do have to look at the chart, you look at it quickly and then turn it back over again, just enough to cue the process or cue the next stage. And it's the drawing back from the hard drive into the RAM, if you like.
Yeah.
It's that process that enables you to memorize things again. I was doing it today with it's very, very unbluesy, but a Joe Satriani piece that I learned when I was 17 called Midnight, a two-handed tapping thing.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And I could remember a big chunk of it, but I couldn't for the life of me remember the middle bit. And I know it. I knew it was in there, and I literally just, this was just, I got the book out, my old tab book that I must have had for 30 years. I got the book out, and I just literally opened the page, and I looked at the first bar of that other section, and I could close it again, and I could remember the whole thing.
Yeah.
So it's just about triggering it. And now that I know that it'll all be back again. It'll probably it'll stay in my RAM for another 10 years now that I've drawn it back and dusted it off. So
I've got a slide on recall coming up, but while we're talking about recall, the way I used to explain it to students was it's like walking into a forest. When you first learn something, you're going to hack into the forest with a machete, and you hack your way in, you get in 50 yards, you've made a lovely path, and you walk out and think, right, I've done that. If you don't go back into that path will overgrow quite quickly. So you need to go back 2 weeks later and hack the path down a bit more and then carry on. Then if it's a summer, you have to go back in 3 or 4 more times. Eventually the path will be there and it will stay there. But you've got to go through that exercise of walking in and out of that memory to get that memory fixed in long-term memory. And there's a good physiological reason for it, which is you basically, the way our brains work is we log everything. You think about how much information is in front of you right now. Your brain is logging all of this massive information into your head. And what it does, it puts it all into short-term memory in your brain. And then when you sleep tonight, your brain will kind of go through that short-term memory file and it'll say, oh, some interesting stuff. Oh, this might be useful. Let's put that in long-term. This is not useful. Let's chuck it out. Mm-hmm. And then over time and over sleep cycles, your brain sifts through that short-term memory stuff and gets rid of it. If you want to keep a memory, you've got to keep putting it back into your memory, and then your brain tags it as being important, and then it keeps putting it into your long-term memory. Mm-hmm. And eventually it will be fixed in your long-term memory. And there's a technique for doing that, which I'll talk about in a second. But
is this are you going to go into the spacing, like the week,
spacing,
fortnight, month, 6 month thing? Okay, then in that case, I'll just shut up now at this
point.
I'll let you do that.
We're there. We can talk about it now because we're going to get to it. It's about a few slides on, but anyway.
Okay, yeah, I'll pop back in a minute then. I'll just you do the slide. Fan,
let's see all the magic next slide.
Fanny, do you want to get rid of me and put Pete back with his slide?
I've got to be honest, I don't know what next slide is, so it could be anything. Huh? It could be, might be my holiday.
I don't know how to do it. Sorry for the absolute professionalism. I don't know how to put the slide on, Fan. You've got to do it. There you go. I'm still there, but that's lovely. Okay. I can stay here for now.
That's
I'll just
fine.
Be quiet.
So should we go on to the next one? What is that, I wonder? Oh, no, visualization. Oh, this is cool. This is a major slide. We go around here. Okay, so one of the questions I get asked all the time is, how do I memorize stuff? Because I'm saying, you got to memorize stuff. Well, the most effective way for you to do it is to learn to visualize and use mental rehearsal. So when you do motor skills in a mental rehearsal capacity, there is some benefit to these, which is quite interesting, which you'll know about, Jess, which is for example, when they put electrodes on athletes' bodies and they get them to think through the thing they're going to do, what happens is all their muscles micro-fire as they think through the process. So actually thinking through the process is actually physically triggering the muscles of doing it. So there is benefit in mental practice about thinking things through and imagining yourself playing them. And there's loads of sort of studies around the neurological benefit of doing those kind of things, which I'm sure you know about as well, Jess. Mm-hmm. But the real big benefit from visualization and mental rehearsal is about learning stuff and mental skills. And this is where it has the most massive benefit. And I know we'll talk about you in a second, Justin, with your unique nature. But visualization is the way to reduce the workload on your brain so that just the key elements are left of what you like to learn. And I'm going to talk how to do this in a second. But the outcome of this is you can learn to play the guitar without having a guitar in your hands. That's so important, I'm going to say it again. You can learn to play the guitar without having a guitar. So that means when you're sat in the queue at the supermarket and your wife's gone to go shopping or whatever, and you're just sat there shooting away, 10 minutes are going by, you can mentally rehearse things in your head and learn things. And that's just as effective, more effective than actually physically trying to learn it when you play guitar. And the way I used to explain this was, think about what your brain, if your brain is a computer, which it pretty much is, Elon Musk, I'm sure, would think that. If your brain's a computer, then think about what's happening when you play guitar. A part of your computer power is going to be running this left hand down here and making sure that it's going in the right place, putting the right finger in the right place, controlling the muscles that do that. It's going to be squeezing. It's going to be looking at where you're putting your finger. So your brain is going to be taking all that visual information and turning it into some information in your head and connecting it to what's happening down there and going, well, my eyes are telling me that my finger's on the fifth fret. Great. Is that the right finger? That my eyes are telling me it's the second finger. That's all happening. You're then looking at the page in front of you, which has got the information on, and you're kind of going, okay, well, that means this and that means that here, and I'm trying to decode that. Then you're holding onto your plectrum and you're kind of making sure that you're plucking the right string, and then when you're playing it, you're listening to the sounds coming out the amp. You're going, is that the right sound? Am I expecting that? That's all happening before you've even tried to memorize anything on that page that's in front of you. So what we do is we get rid of all of this. All of this goes, and all we're going to deal with is trying to memorize and visualize what's on the page in front of you. And then once we've mentally recorded it and made a mental impression of what it is, we're going to turn the page over and we're then going to play what we've memorized. So the first time we play the guitar is after we've memorized it. And that's a massive change in the way you practice, probably. And it's a significant improvement in the efficiency of you learning, because what happens now is all of your brain is focused on record. It's like a super massive recording device. You've focused all your attention on what you've got to learn, and all you're going to do is try and pick that up and put it in your head. And then after that, you're going to try and process it onto the guitar. So that's a real change in the way you want to practice guitar. Now, I'll show you how to do that in a second, but Jess, do you want to make a comment about anything else on that?
The aphantasia thing. Well,
Yeah.
I'll say two things. So, Wesley has actually put in the comments there, I can't visualize as such, I can only do a kind of imagine, no picture though. So I have the same thing. It's actually a kind of condition's probably not the right word for it, but it's a thing. It's called aphantasia. And I only in the last few years discovered that people can actually see like vivid pictures in their imagination. I can't. I can imagine things that I've made myself learn, but I don't see a picture. And I can kind of I can imagine a guitar neck, and I can imagine moving my fingers around, and I can think about doing those things. And I suspect that I get the same benefit because I used to do this visualization, only I just didn't really have a picture, and I just didn't know that people actually had a real picture. So don't put it off if you don't have like a really clear picture. I still think it's beneficial. Interesting, I still do it for things like jiu-jitsu when I'm training that, trying to remember sequences of moves. I can close my eyes and I think about the things that have to happen in the order that I've got to grab this or move that arm or shift my body weight this way or that way. And I'm only using this as an example because it's something I'm learning and it's very similar to guitar. And it's the same as what I used to do on guitar, like thinking about the sequences of things, finger numbers for scales to go, the major scale, I'm using my second finger, then my fourth finger, first finger, second finger, fourth finger, first finger, third finger, fourth, that kind of imagining, as opposed to, I used to get frustrated with meditation things where it'd be like, imagine yourself walking down to this peaceful river and you're sitting under a tree. And I'm like, I can imagine myself kind of doing that, but there's no picture there. I was like, when I discovered that people can actually live in that sort of picture and manipulate, I was super jealous. So don't be put off if you don't get the picture. Just find the way that feels good for you. And just on this, on the memorization and learning to play it before you memorize it, before you take it off the page, after you've taken it off the page, another good friend of ours, Mark Johns, who I met through Pete a long time ago, taught me about transcribing solos to memory and then writing it down. And that was such a game changer for me, because I would always transcribe things and write them down as I went, and then try and learn it off the page after I'd already written it down. He's like, why would you do it that way around? Like, you want to learn it, don't you? And I'm like, Yeah. And he said the point of writing it down is just to, in case you forget it later. Yeah. So why don't you learn it first and then write it down from memory, and that way you definitely know you've remembered it.
Yeah,
Now, I don't
great
do it all the
advice.
time because I do a lot of transcribing like for teaching, but if I'm learning something for myself, if I'm learning a solo or a piece of music that I want for my own musical growth, I will always try and learn it into my memory first and then write it down from my memory later as a way of ensuring that I've actually learned it.
Yeah, that's great advice. I
So,
was going to ask you. So, do you? I've asked this question before, but I forgot. I forgot the answer.
yeah.
Do you dream in visually as well? Do you ever have that
Yeah, I
experience? Or do you?
can. Yeah, I have dreams. I don't. I get the feeling they're not maybe as vivid as other people have, but I
Yeah,
do have. I can imagine things. I wake up having a dream, and it's almost like flashbacks of images. So I'm certain that there
yeah,
is
yeah,
some
yeah. It's just
ability
perhaps
to
the
imagine things.
fidelity
It's just
coding.
not the kind of thing that. Yeah, so it's really interesting. If you look it up, there's a thing called the aphantasia network, which you can go on and kind of test and figure out where you are.
I
It,
reckon
like
there's a.
with most things, there's a spectrum of things. There's like
Yeah,
people can see some sort of shady images, some black and white. Other people just can't see anything at all. It's so
yeah.
yeah,
Because I know people that have really vivid, like remarkably, almost like photographic, imagery.
yeah,
So we're on a scale, but that's kind of cool, isn't it?
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Okay, should we go to the next slide
Yeah,
then?
yeah,
Which is me telling, well, not telling you, but suggesting a way that you can go about visualizing stuff. So, so essentially, the first thing you do is you put your guitar down, which is freaks people out. We don't have to put it down, but in the memorizing process, you're not supposed. Don't touch the guitar. So let's say you're going to, let's say we're going to learn the first three strings of the minor six pentatonic, which is like a minor pentatonic with a minor sixth as opposed where the flat seven has been dropped to a major sixth. It's a Robin Ford thing, funny enough. There you go. So if I was going to memorize that, what I would do is I would create a mental image of my guitar, my particular guitar neck in my head. So I know I've got dot markers on the side here, got dot markers on there, dot marker on 3, 5, 7. I could see all of that in my mind's eye as I think about it. And then I'm going to think about where my fingers are going to go on each of those notes as I play that scale through in my mind's eye. So I know my first finger is. I'm showing you on the guitar. My first finger is going to be on the 5th fret here. My pinky is going to be on the 8th fret here. My first finger's. Fanny's having fun with the.
Sorry, Fanny is the backstage moderator, and she's trying to get the screen a bit bigger. But look, she's like, "Oh God!"
It's my fault.
Sorry,
I'm so
Fan.
sorry. I asked her to do this presentation. So yeah, it's my first finger. I know is going to go on the 5th fret of the 6th string. My pinky's going to go on the 8th fret of the 6th string. First finger is going to go 7th fret on the 5th string. 5th fret. 7th fret on the 5th string with my 3rd finger. I'm going to reach back with my first finger to 4th fret on the D string, 4th string, and then reach back up to the 7th fret on that same string. So I know those notes. I've got them perhaps written out in front of me. The way I would go about visualizing this is I'd close my eyes, create that image of my guitar neck, and then mentally put my first finger where it needs to go. Then I'm mentally going to put my pinky where it needs to go. Then put my first finger where it needs to go. Then in my mind, put my 3rd finger back on the 7th fret of the A string. Then reach back with that first finger to the 4th fret, and then reach back up again to the 7th fret. So that process is going to be visualizing what's happening here. At the same time, I'm going to visualize picking each of those individual strings so I can see where they're on. And I consciously do that for each note as I go through. I would never memorize more than 3 strings on a guitar. If I'm learning a new scale, at the most 3 strings. If it's a 3-note per string thing, maybe 2 strings. And then you do that all the way through in your mind's eye for about a minute to 90 seconds. And so that would be how I'd memorize that. And then I'd stop, have a break, turn the page over so I can't see it. And then I would then put a metronome on incredibly slowly and play what I've learned from memory without a mistake. This is a really important bit. You can't go, you can't make mistakes. You've got to play exactly what you've just learned from memory without an error whatsoever, because that's the only way you know that you've programmed it into your head correctly.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm going to jump in here,
Go
Pete,
ahead.
because there was a really great question here that I think is probably a lot of other people are thinking the same thing, and it's author M.D. Vance. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. It says, "Being older, I'm finding the muscle memory piece to be a frustratingly slow. You say don't make mistakes during the motor skills, but I can't seem to get it right until I've played it 100 times." So I can't remember who it was. Was it Einstein? There's a famous philosopher saying that if you do things, 99 times wrong, there's no reason that you should suddenly get it right on the 100th time. And it really, really, I know it's frustrating,
Mm.
but you really, really should make sure you're doing things at a tempo where you can get it right. And I promise you that you won't have to do it then 100 times in order to do that. So you just need to slow it down to the point that if you're learning a new scale and you're struggling with it, do it at the speed of like, okay, it's the second finger on the fifth fret on the thicker string. Okay, the fifth fret, second finger. Okay, that's okay, that's it. Okay, now the next one, that's that slowly. Don't go,
Yeah.
oh, oh, no. If you're doing it that way, it's just going to really, really hinder the process. It's like writing really crappy code in your memory. What you want to do, ideally, ask any coder, is get the code right the first time, not have to go and fix all the bugs later. So
Yeah.
do it so slowly and carefully that you just absolutely get it right and revise it regularly. As Pete was saying, never more than 3 strings at a time. I'd be more inclined to do sets of 2 strings. So
Yeah.
do
I
two
agree.
strings and then just play them over and over again. Then maybe add another string, practice those 3 over and over, add another string, practice those 4. And practicing that way and never making mistakes mean you never trying to go back and correct stuff.
Yeah.
The amount of computation power that your brain has to do to put a finger on the string. You think about how many, if we were getting a robot to put the finger on the guitar, thinking about the pressure, where it is, how it goes, getting another hand to pick the same string as the finger was on, all that. It's complicated, really complicated. So if you start doing it wrong, and then your brain code goes, put your second finger down, no, not the second finger this time, lift it back up, put it down here. No, the first finger has got to, it's just too hard. So really, when you're practicing things, really try and not make mistakes at all. I know it seems like, oh, I can't do it, but you can absolutely do it if you do it slow enough. And if you get into the habit of doing it slowly and carefully, you'll end up practicing a lot faster. It might not feel like it at the beginning, but I promise you it works, no matter what age you are. Sorry,
Yeah.
Pete.
No, I agree with that. I'm going to echo that as well. Because I mean, I bet everyone on this call has got a song they play where their kind of campfire song, and they always go to the bridge in the wrong place. Like, oh God! Or there's a tune where you always play the wrong bit at the wrong time, but you always make the same mistake in the same place. And that's an example of where you've learnt to do that mistake. And it's really, really hard to deprogram that mistake and put the right thing back in. It's much, much quicker to do it correctly in the first place. So that's the kind of that's what, as Justin was just saying, make sure you get it right first time around. The other thing to say as well, with the older, I am an older gentleman, and with the older gentlemen or ladies, sorry, it's we are the worst guitar students because we are impatient because we're much older and we believe we should be able to do things faster. But funny enough, cognitively and motor skill in terms of physically, we are less capable than a 15-year-old. I was just talking to Justin just before the call about we had a 17-year-old kid turn up at this local gig I go to, and he said, "Oh, can I play a John Mayer tune?" And we went, "Oh, sure, man, no problems." And he got and played a John, and he absolutely nailed it. He was fantastic at 17. And it's because things come so quickly at that age. Their brain is super plastic. Loads of things come easily to them. So we have to unfortunately just accept that it's going to take us longer and it's going to be frustrating. And you just have to kind of unfortunately suck it up. Practice things that you can do and make yourself feel good. There's things you can do to make yourself feel good about guitar playing, but don't beat yourself up about the things you can't do just yet. Just take them real slow and get to them over time.
And remember that you can do it actually. So
Yeah.
You might remember, Pete, a guy called Ian, who was I first met as a student on like a rock weekend thing that we used to do at the Guitar Institute. And he became a private student of mine, and he was always frustrated that he couldn't get his technique together. And it was, he was looking at retiring, and think he worked as a fireman during the day, and he was like, oh, he was a very dedicated student, a really lovely guy and a very dedicated student. And he just kept at it. He kept plugging away, practicing as much as he could. And he went right through from like being able to quit his job and having a band and playing, parties and pubs and functions and all of that sort of stuff. So he made the dream happen of being a kind of professional, not even a kind of, sorry. He made it as a professional working musician as an older guy. So there's not, don't ever think that it can't be done. It just does take a bit of a slog, and you've got to use, I feel like we have to use our older brains wiser.
Yeah.
Because things like this, not practicing making mistakes. Like when you're young and you've got all the time in the world as well, which most youngsters have a lot more time than older people have usually. We don't have time to spend making mistakes and getting stuff wrong. So you got to stay a bit more focused and get things right and do things the right way. I think that's
absolutely. Life hacks, man. I mean, it's like, if you haven't got time to learn the melodic minor in 7 positions or whatever, learn it in 1 and just use it there and be done with it. If that's what your bag is, there's millions of great guitar players who play the same thing or the same idea in a million different varieties, and they're super inventive with the same thing, but they don't have a lot.
Albert King's got like 5 licks.
They're killers, aren't they?
But he's one of the greatest. They're amazing licks, but there's not very many of them, and he was one of the most influential bluesmen of all time. So, like,
exactly, yeah. And it's not the lick. That's the thing. That's the whole thing. Because we get so hung up on the notes. It's nothing to do with the notes. It's what he means to say by it. Anyway, let's go on a bit further. Okay. So that's a way of visualizing. So that's a practical way. One of the things about this is going to come up in a minute will be how you organize your time, but we'll come back to that in a second. So that's a quick sort of overview of it. And again, put the guitar down, use your brain more than your hands, and that will be a really good start. So let's flip on again. This I think we've talked about, which is this is it, long-term versus short-term memory. This is a great little diagram, isn't it? Which basically is saying if you pick something up quickly, then you're kind of the curve of forgetting on the first curve on the left, the steepest curve is how much information you would lose over that period of time frame if you didn't go back to it. So you can see that after a month or so, you've pretty much or 2 months, you've lost everything you would have learned from that point because your brain slowly just considers it to be useless information. So then you need to go back to see it. Now, I don't particularly agree with this timing, but the idea is correct, which is you return to it as soon as you can, maybe a few days after you first learnt it, refresh it, go back over everything you've learned and memorized. And that will put it into a slightly better position in your memory. So it's now on the red curve. But then after, again, another break of time, typically a week, say, you go back for your next reminder, and now you're on the black curve. And then if you go back for a third reminder, eventually, by the time you get to the fourth reminder, it will be in your long-term memory. You will never forget it. So that's the way to move things from short-term memory through slowly into long-term memory. And typically that means that means having an active approach to refreshing information. So let's say you learn last week's task was to learn whatever it was in your guitar practice, a tune by Creedence Clearwater Revival, which you learned to play. Great. In a week's time, you need to program some time to play that again. Don't just forget about it, but actually consciously go back to it, play the song through, remind yourself of that bridge that's a little bit freaky that you forgot about. And the fact that it's tuned down or whatever, a half step, which is what he did. It was a whole step, wasn't it? I think he tuned down. Do all those kind of, check all those little details, and that's your first reminder, and then play it through and then put it in the locker again, go back a week later. So you've got to have this kind of gardening approach to your knowledge, which is going back and tending to your knowledge and tending to the things you've got in your kit. Does that make sense?
So this is time spacing.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the guy's name. When I was at the Tasmanian Conservatorium, we had a guy visit when I was in my first year, and he was some sort of memory Olympiad or memory champion he did something weird, like memorized, I don't know, hundreds of cards in the order of some cards or something.
With all the memory rooms, all that stuff.
Yeah. It was insane. And he did a talk about all of this stuff, memorization. The long-term thing, he was saying it was a day, a week, a fortnight, a month, 6 months in a year. And if you revise things regularly in those intervals, you'll never forget them. And he was right, because I did it for all of my repertoire that I learned, the classical repertoire, and I can still remember it. And sometimes it gets a bit dusty, and I might have like a little stumble where it's like, oh God, I
Yeah.
can't flip over the next bit if it's been 15 years since I've looked at it or whatever, but I know that they're still there. They're 100% still there. And like I did with the Satriani one today, it just took that look at that one bar to go, oh yeah, it's that. Off I go.
Yeah.
And it all comes back. So yeah, time spacing is a scientifically proven
Yeah. It works.
technique. And you know, when we're talking about blues licks and songs and vocabulary, definitely having a sort of a plan to revise things beyond our time together on the blues immersion course. You want to be thinking in 6 months or a year, few months, going back and revising the
Yeah.
licks and the phrases and the things that you might want to make sure are permanently in your musical vocabulary.
Yeah, that's what that, it is gardening. You're just looking after your garden of knowledge, basically. Anyway, enough of the
That's nice.
gardening analogies.
Garden of knowledge.
Yeah. Let's go on to the next slide, which is that we've spoken about this already, so that's kind of cool. This is really important, managing practice, and there is no one way to do this. But the idea about practice, and the bottom thing here is the first thing, which is using a practice log. So the idea about managing your time, managing what you're going to do and what you're going to practice, and sort of having clear, decided goals. So and reasonable goals. So, for example, if you're kind of be honest about your rate of progress. If your rate of progress is that by next week you can memorize 2 patterns of a scale and you can memorize, whatever tasks you've been given. If that's what you can do, that's your goal for this week. Nothing more. Don't be adding things in. Just be very clear. And then what you then need to do is do a bit of analysis of those tasks. So your goals for this week will break into typically one of two things: a memory task or a motor task. So even if it's learning a new scale to play, that's 2 tasks. The memory task is a separate thing to the playing task. So when you let's say you've got to learn your minor pentatonic position 1, your first task will be memorizing the first 2 strings. And in your practice log, you write memorize first 2 strings of guitar, 1 minute. And that means you're going to spend 1 minute visualizing that every day for this coming week. The next task is going to be memorize the middle 2 strings of the first position of the minor pentatonic, 1 minute. The third one, top 2 strings, 1 minute. And then what you'll do is you'll visualize, put the guitar down, visualize those bottom 2 strings on the guitar, and you'll tick it off every day that you do those 3 little tasks. You then flip over to the motor skills, which is play the first 2 strings of the minor pentatonic, and then you'll practice them for maybe 3 minutes. It's a bit long for that one, but you get the idea. Maybe 2 minutes. So you put down play first 2 strings, 2 minutes. Play first 4 strings. So now you can amalgamate those first 2 bits of memory together and practice the 4 strings once you've memorized them, or practice them all 6 strings as one go. But the idea is you memorize first, practice motor skills second. And by doing this, what you're going to do is be far more effective and efficient about how you pick up information and then how you practice the mechanical information. And each task gets a time frame for that. And that also, you build up your practice for the day based on all of the week for these goals. That will give you a really useful piece of information, which is how long you need to practice every day. Because sometimes the thought of starting to play guitar is quite daunting if you've got a job, or if you've been out, done the shopping, you come home, hoovered the house, whatever you've done, put the washing on, you think, oh no, I really kind of don't want to do this. If you know your guitar practice is going to take 1 hour and it's going to fulfill all your commitments to the instrument for that day, that's a bit easier to deal with. You go, okay, it's only going to take an hour. I can do it before I get tea going. So that allows you to understand, I'm going to practice for 1 hour every day, and you can do that. And you use a clock and you time yourself and you don't cheat, and then your practice is done. You can always practice more if you want to, but the idea is you've kind of got this base commitment going. And that's all about managing your practice time and managing your time on the instrument. It's not saying you can only play for that time. It's just saying that your practice time is that long. If you then want to go and put on a Hendrix backing track and wig out for an hour and annoy the neighbors, great, go ahead. So that's practice logs. And I know that you talk a lot about practice logs, Justin, so I didn't bother going into these in any detail. So
I think that all of that's good. I'd only add to it that if you struggle to get all of your practice done, at least getting your bum on the seat for a little while is a good idea. So
Yeah,
sometimes even uh, trying to practice for an hour might seem overwhelming. So you might go, okay, well, I'm just going to sit down and I'm just going to do the first one. And I think that most people, the struggle is getting your bum on the seat. So that
yeah,
if you can actually get there to do the first one, you'll probably find that you're able to do more than you thought. It's just that initial getting there that can be off-putting. So,
absolutely.
if you're
Yeah,
worried about it, maybe just try and do, okay, well, I probably won't be able to do the whole hour. So I'll just do the 5 minutes of jamming on those licks and memorizing them. But when you sit down and do it, you're like, oh yeah, this is kind of fun. Maybe I'll do this too. So it can kind of open the door to doing more practice.
yeah, absolutely. It's definitely about getting into routine. And the other thing I used to do as well when we were working loads was I would, like you just said, if I couldn't fill out my practice, I'd tick everything I did every day. And if I got to the end of the day and I hadn't done everything, I would go start the next day, fill it out everything, and then go back over the things
Hmm.
I'd missed. So you can monitor, you do that thing where you kind of fill out. I mean, it's a bit
It
anal.
takes a special kind of nerd to do this stuff, Pete.
I know, I
I
know.
like to think there are more like us, but yeah,
Yeah, I
I'm with
suspect
you.
not.
I've done exactly the same thing.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Okay, so there's a couple of the things I've got at the end here to sort of kind of some thoughts which are useful to talk about as well. Um, Accuracy versus speed. One of the classic ones, and this comes back to that thing we were talking about earlier, which is, don't try and play things too fast that you fall over them. It's a kind of a corollary to the doing things wrong thing, because you've got to learn to play it correctly before you can play it quickly, and people kind of miss out that step and try and play it quickly. So you need to practice playing everything as flawlessly as you can. And don't let it sit. If you make a mistake, stop and don't let it go unheeded. Correct the mistake, practice it without the mistake. And even some things like things like when you play guitar. This is very nerdy. How does plectrum sound on the guitar? So, for example, I'm acoustic here now, but if I play the plectrum flat against the strings, you get that rattle. If you play it with an angled plectrum, it's a different sound. It doesn't really come out here, but on an acoustic guitar, you can hear it. The angled plectrum makes a much nicer sound than a flat plectrum attack. And those little things do make a difference. There's a reason why your favorite guitar player sounds amazing consistently. It's because they've paid attention to those little things. So
Hmm.
when you're practicing, don't miss the opportunity to get into the weeds and the nerdy stuff. Hey, it's Jed. Yeah, there we go. Hey, Jed,
It's
how you
the
doing,
thing to
mate?
do with like choosing a pick and stuff like that that makes the difference. When you uh, people often seem to imagine that those things don't make any difference at all, but each of those tiny little things add up. So trying to find the right strings for your guitar that feel good and sound good to you, the right plectrum, the right cable, the right pedal, or whatever. It's the
Yeah.
mixture of all of those things which on their own might seem insignificant, but the combination of all of those 1% might add up to 15%, which ends up being a significant lifting game if you get all of those things right. So
Yeah, they all
I
make
think,
they all make a
yeah.
difference, which is the kind of interesting thing. Um,
Um, was there a message from Jed on the screen
yeah, I saw Jed said hello.
saying,
Yeah,
oh,
there
there
we
he
go.
is. He assessed me to get into the Guitar Institute in
Oh
2001.
my God, 2001, back in the day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Were you that late to the Institute, Jed? You were there where I went in 96, and I thought that you were, or maybe you weren't around then when I first got there. Maybe you
I
showed
don't
up
know.
later. I can't remember.
Yeah, 2001 does sound a bit late to me, but
Yeah, it does to me.
oh yes, he is. Anyway, there we go. Um,
Anyways, okay.
I've got
Um,
another couple of bits.
okay, you do the bits, and then we'll rip through these questions.
Okay, so they're tiny little thoughts. They're thoughts to think about, and the last one is the important one. First one, motivation. We're making it sound like a chore. Don't make it become a chore, because you don't want to. The reason you do this is because you love this plank of wood, and you don't want to ever fall out of love with this. So you've got to manage your relationship with it. It's like anything, it needs to be nurtured. So don't let practice become a chore. I used to do things, always do something at the end that you really love to do, or something that you think you sound shit hot playing. Play something great at the end of your practice. Always leave the guitar on a positive note. Never go to bed having an argument. That's the way to live. But it's important, because I know loads of people who are great musicians who've lost the love of it, and it's a tragedy, because it's our loss, because they're not in the world of music anymore. The other one is diagnosis of problems. Really be as musicians, you are, all of you, going to be very body aware, because you use your hands in a very specific and quite delicate manner. You will be extremely aware of how your body feels, but it applies to everything else as well. For example, where you practice, is the light good enough to see what you're looking at? When I was a kid, I used to sit on my bed playing my guitar, sort of turned around with and I wondered why I got a bad back. It's have a nice chair, have a comfy place to practice. Things like when you first pick up your guitar, if it's slightly out of tune, you may not notice it, but it might be enough that subconsciously you think you sound bad. And that's a really weird effect. Or playing with a jamming track. If you're not perfectly in tune with a jamming track, doesn't matter what you play, it will sound bad. And that's not your fault. That's your tuner's fault. So that's really, be aware of why is it being like this? As I said to you earlier on this call, I only practice really well in the mornings now. I play in the afternoons, but my most good learning is done in the mornings. So I have to manage that, and sometimes if it's cold, my hands don't warm up quick enough, I get frustrated, I have to put the guitar down. So I'm aware of those things that keep me going. And the last one, pain. Be really careful. Listen to your body, especially when you're older. I've injured my first finger here. I did it last September, and what happened was I did two things. I did one sensible thing, one stupid thing. I strimmed and trimmed the entire road outside my house. I live in the countryside, and it was overgrown. So I went outside with a strimmer, just cut it all down, what have you, having never trimmed anything in my life. And I gave myself a hand injury. And then I didn't realize, I went and did a solo jazz guitar gig, which was all fun and great, but it was hard, demanding. I had to learn loads. And I gave myself an injury, and it's still not repaired. And that's taken, because I'm an older person, it takes a long time for injuries to go. So make sure you listen to your body, be really aware of what's happening in your hands, and don't overdo it. That's super, super important. And then that was it, really. So music's, that's it, really. It's the best thing in your life. It's also the worst thing in your life.
Can't kill it. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Pete. That was super insightful. I really enjoyed it. It was great to hear those things again. I'm going to we're kind of running out of time, but there's a few questions there, and some of those are really good. So let's jump on these quickly. Martin says, does that mean you have to commit to memory before practicing? There's not a have to, and everyone is different, and everyone's going to have a different approach to doing it. I think oftentimes memorizing something before you learn it is the better path if you're able to. But I definitely find myself, there are times where I'm learning it with the music around for a little bit and gradually trying to wean myself off. So I don't want to be a hypocrite and say, yeah, you must memorize things first. I think that's the preferred option, and it's what I aim for if it's something that I really want in my musical vocabulary, but it's not something that always happens. Pierre, same for you?
Yeah, exactly the same. I know people I work with and friends I've got who always have their repertoire like a foot nearer the front than me. You know what I mean? They can just play things and they go, oh yeah, I know that tune, buff, and they play it. And they're kind of it's a bit more immediate, whereas I have to pull it out of my memory. And I think those people are the ones that have memorized very early on. They've learnt it, it's gone in, they've probably done the recall thing, so it's repertoire that's just there. And so it's all about, I think also it's all about, when do you let go of something? When you practice something and you practice it over and over and over, and you think, oh, that's good enough. Is it? Because there's the old adage, isn't it? What is it? An amateur musician practices something till they get it right. A professional musician practices it till they can't get it wrong. There's a lot in that. So that's a useful thing to think about as well.
Yeah, sage stuff. Uh, Babak says, when I learn a piece, it gets only sequential in my memory, meaning that I cannot later use its small parts like a lick for myself. Is there a solution for that? And that is a fantastic question, and definitely one that I've battled with myself. My solution has been to break particularly solos down into component parts and working on them separately. Good example is something like Robin Ford. I've learned tons and tons of his solos. In fact, I think that was how Pete and I became friends all those years ago.
Yeah.
Was swapping Robin Ford transcriptions at the institute. And a lot of those solos were things that I practiced over and over again to learn to play along with the record, but they never came out of my playing, and I was aware of it. So what I used to do is literally chop them up with a red pen and go and learn it chunk by chunk, and then take the chunks out and try and improvise with the chunks. It's a smaller amount of them, and try and work those ones in, and then go back. And I'd always just pick the ones that I was most keen on adding to my soup, because you couldn't add. I didn't feel like I could add all of them, and I found that to be much more effective for developing the vocabulary in a usable way.
Babab, I've got the perfect thing for you to practice, which is I do this to
in 7/8.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. And then 5/4. No, so for example, okay, here's a Robin Ford solo. Oh. That's the first part of a Robin Ford solo. That's a 12-bar cycle. What you want to do is learn to play it exactly like Robin Ford. And what I would try and do is get the phrasing exactly the same. I mean, I'm using Robin as an example, but it could be anybody. Get the phrasing exactly the same, whack on a backing track, and then practice playing it exactly like Robin Ford as close as you can. But then on the second recycle of the tune, when it goes round again, play it close to Robin Ford, but kind of add your own bit. So for example, it opens like this. That's how the lick opens, okay? So next time you play it, go. Which is a variation on what he played. And then what you're doing is you're basically jamming with Robin Ford. You play his solo exactly like he plays it. Then you paraphrase it, and you bend it slightly out of shape. And then you play his again. And then it's like trading licks with Robin Ford. You just basically go back and forth. And I found that was a really great way to break out of playing his solo when I got to play a solo, but playing something that was inspired and based upon the licks you've learned from him. And it gets a very organic way into your playing, which I think is a very cool thing.
Agreed. You can do it. Is the power of or difference in visualization versus air guitar visualization? Picturing left and right hand seems hard without physically doing it. I'm probably not the best person to ask about visualization for reasons as discussed earlier, but I've not really worked on visualization ever, or even thinking about it with my pick and hand. It's mainly been about, thinking about chords and scales and stuff like that. Pete?
Yeah, so you try loads of different ways. So I used to actually do it by I used to use the guitar. I'd imagine myself playing the guitar if I needed to see something as a reference point. For example, I'd imagine what a chord voicing looked like, or I imagine on the fretboard what my hand feels like. So again, it's finding things that work for you. I do imagine things with my right hand. So for example, there's a picking pattern I've got to play. It goes, what is it? With a piece of music I'm playing, learning to play, which is in 7, and it's an awkward picking pattern for me to play, because it's the picking in the right hand is alternating, not strict alternate picking. It's going down, down, up, 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 down, all this kind of stuff. So I had to memorize that, and that's how I did it. I just literally memorized myself playing it to make sure it was locked in my head, or I've just started doing it. So I think you've got to kind of figure out how it works for you, and apply them in the best way. Experiment, try things out. If it doesn't work, try a different way until it comes to you. But the key thing is separate your playing from your memorizing. That's just however you do that is going to help you.
Great question. Okay, I'm going to have to do super quick ones for this.
Yep.
Nishant, though, very good question again. Should I be aiming to learn everything using these methods? To me, and with due respect, it seems like a lot of hassle to learn something I could do the usual way, look, play, repeat. So if something's working for you and you're happy with your progress and development, then I would suggest maybe just keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
You might find, if you were curious, that it would be worth having a try at this idea, particularly things like time spacing, and at least being time spacing, I think will make a huge difference. So that's definitely
Yeah.
something. But when we talk about the usual way, I think, at least my takeaway from the stuff Pete's talking about, the key thing is being aware of what it is that you're actually practicing, and whether it's a physical thing like going to the gym, muscular, or whether it's a thinking thing like a memorization thing. And if it's a muscular thing, you can do it for forever and it's fine. You can just do it the old way or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's when you're doing a thinky thing that I feel like it's most important that you're aware of breaks, doing the right repetition. So it's as much just understanding what it is you're doing rather than just going at it blind. I don't know.
Yeah, and just quickly, so Nishant, the thing that you're asking is, so there's the rate at which you can improve physically is that, and if you work really, really hard, it'll be that. It's never going to be that. The rate at which you learn stuff may or well be, for example, you might be quite happy learning new information at the same rate that you're learning to play the instrument, which is fine. The old way will work. But if you're really trying to accelerate things in your playing, like your harmony theory, like all your scale knowledge, or your things, your knowledge on the instrument, you can learn an awful lot more quicker by using these techniques. You won't be able to play them faster, but you will learn them quicker. So it's just depends where you want to get to, really. The reason we did it at school was because there's a huge amount of information coming at everybody every week, and they had to keep on top of it. So that's why we had to do this, just to get them as effective as they can in learning quickly.
Absolutely. Xander says, if our time is our biggest limitation to practicing, should we focus on visualizing practice instead of physically with a guitar in a hand?
No.
My opinion would be no, to just, if you've got a chance to get a guitar in your hand, get it in your hand and play. I think that there's going to be lots of times in a day, at least in my day, and I'd assume for most people, where you have time to think and be able to do some of the visualization. So for me, it would be the thing to do when I can't get a guitar in my hand, not instead of, although Pete was saying before having that you used to do it with a guitar in your hand, right? Is that what you said?
So, well, in my practice schedule, I used to put in little micro visualization sessions, and I wouldn't put the guitar down because I'd sit there and go, okay, let's visualize the harmonic minor here. Okay, so I can picture that. I can picture my fingers. I can see the harmonic minor in that position there, boof, and then I'd visualize it, and then I'd practice it. So I would essentially just flip between visualization and practice, like you were saying earlier, or little sections of visualization, section of practice. But what I wouldn't do is learn the harmonic minor by going. I would never learn it like that. I would learn it in my imagination and then play it.
There we go. Okay, last question. Fatima says, any advice when it comes to practicing with others, jamming with them? Is this beneficial? Would you recommend this for beginners or suggest a certain level that should be reached before doing so? I think playing with other musicians is the best possible thing you can do.
Absolutely.
Just on a human level, to connect with other people, to experience the power of music, to connect people, to express yourself. Playing with other people is absolutely where it's at. And, I feel like one of the reasons I was able to stick at doing the guitar thing for so long was that I started playing with people very early on. I played in a band when I was 10, I want to say, and we started doing gigs and stuff, and it was like that camaraderie and the confidence, and there's all of these things that develop when you play with other people, the shared journey, the shared frustration, seeking answers from each other, seeking, having somebody to share your successes with, and the days where it feels a bit rough, that it's incredibly powerful, and you do whatever you can at whatever stage you can. Pete?
Yeah. Sharing, it's the most important thing. Sharing music with other people is the most important thing. And Just a quick one about some people that sort of think they're a bit too good to play with you and all that kind of stuff. Don't bother playing with them. They don't deserve your time. Play with people. I am happy to play with anybody. So someone gets up and wants to play. I do jam nights and stuff. Doesn't matter how experienced they are, because there's going to be some common ground we can find that we can make a bit of music. And there's a moment when you look at each other in the eye when you're playing, you kind of go, yeah, we're connecting. That's what it's all about. So just jam with everybody. Don't feel afraid to ask people, say, hey, can we play some tunes? If they're a good human, they'll be happy to play with you.
Absolutely. Man, Pete, thank you so much for joining us for this.
Pleasure.
Absolutely fantastic session, as was last time. Hope you all enjoyed that one.
Thank you, guys.
You'll catch Pete and I on some adventure at another time, maybe joining us on one of our workshops or something. Yeah, thank you very much, Pete. Thank you all for joining us. Big thank you for Fan for organising all of the stuff and fiddling about with putting the screen in different spots and keeping us entertained and all of that. It's amazing.
I'm sorry, Fanny, for that. It was like,
yeah, have yourself a fantastic rest of your week, and we'll be seeing you inside again very, very soon. Big hi to Jed and Leven and the band hounds keeper Keith. Yeah, everyone who's doing the moderation, all that sort of stuff. Really appreciate your help with all of this as well. Yeah, have a good one. See you again. Bye bye.
Cheers, guys.